The Soul Redeemer, Book 2, Chapter 26a, Sisters. Sam's phone rang, startling him awake. Nicole giggled as he looked around trying to make sense out of his surroundings. "You want me to get that, Sam?" Nicole offered. His answer was to grab the phone and look at the number calling. "Sir," he answered. Joel said, "The package was delivered, disconnected, and the new eyes are in process." "Plan B?" Sam asked. "Affirmative," Joel said. "Go to the place of the package and wait for the next order." "Sir, the package is in compliance?" "Yes. Take Breeze and Gus. Go." "Roger." Sam put the phone down and rubbed the top of his head while he yawned. Nicole wanted to ask questions, but decided she better make some coffee first. She was pleasantly surprised when Sam offered an explanation. "We're going to talk with Megan. She's in compliance. We should be able to get the intel that'll make your job possible." Nicole stopped pouring water into the top of the coffee maker and looked at Sam. "You mean we're going to Samaria?" she asked in disbelief. "Yes, and Gus is coming too." "I'll get to see Jake!" she exclaimed, and then another thought hit her. "I can see Jake, can't I?" She was consumed with a sudden wave of homesickness, and the thought of being so close to her husband and being deprived of that privilege was almost too much to bear. "I'm sure we can work that out, but you've got to keep your mind on the business at hand. Remember the goal. Until it's accomplished, you cannot go home permanently." Sam got up and stretched, then stepped into the bathroom. Nicole finished preparing the coffee and turned it on. "Did I hear Sam say that I'm with you on Plan B?" Gus asked. He was sitting up on the edge of the bed with his elbows on his knees and his hands supporting his head. "Good morning, Gus. Yes, you did," Nicole responded. He picked up his phone and looked at it. "Text from my wife Bertha. Our cat had kittens last night." "Congratulations," Nicole said as she sat down in Sam's chair. She was surprised and pleased that Gus had volunteered some personal information. Maybe he was beginning to accept her. She was feeling something else, though. It was the thought of kittens. Something simple, lovable, and beautiful, and normal. Thinking of kittens made her feel as if there was still a connection to the world as she had known it before hers had come crashing down. "How many?" she asked. "4. 1 gray, 1 orange, 2 black." He handed the phone to her. Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked at the proud mamma nursing her 4 little ones. "They're adorable. Do you have any children?" She handed the phone back. "2. Tasha's a junior in high school and Todd's a freshman in college." He handed her his phone again so she could see a picture of his family. "They look happy. And your wife? She's beautiful." "Bertha is the most beautiful woman on the face of the earth," he said proudly. Nicole smiled. Sam came back into the room and poured a cup of coffee, even though it wasn't quite done. "Okay, I'll book us a flight to Samaria," he said as he waved Nicole out of his chair and began to access flight schedules. "Your intercessor friends must have done a good job, Breeze. I don't know what we'll find exactly, but Joel said she was compliant, and that means she's willing to share info. They've also copied her lenses, and they'll be up and running soon." An uncomfortable feeling was beginning to rise up in her stomach. She would have to face Megan. She decided not to dwell on that thought. She poured a cup of coffee and sat on the sofa. "Why is Gus on assignment? I thought he'd be done after last night." "Bodyguard," Sam said, then looked up and smiled at her. "We do use physical bodyguards sometimes." "You guys talking about that angel last night?" Gus asked. "I never saw it, but there's no way I could have rescued Mandy without divine help." "It seems that God's allowing us to see angels and even interact with them lately," Nicole said as she told Gus about Maria and the men in black while Sam booked their flight. That afternoon Gus pulled the rental car into the yard at Liz's cabin. And when Nicole saw Jake sitting on the front deck, she jumped out the door before the car had come to a complete stop. They met halfway and were in each other's arms, crying and hugging, completely unaware of the others who were gathering around, introducing themselves. Reluctantly, Jake pulled himself away from his wife so that Liz, Casey, and Deanne could greet her. Nicole quickly looked around and was relieved when she didn't see Megan. Jake said, "Nicole, come walk with me before we go in." Jake took her hand and led her around back. He stopped when he realized that Gus was following them. "Can you give us a minute alone?" he asked. "I'll stay out of hearing distance, but I will not let Nicole out of my sight," he answered. Jake smiled. "As frustrating as that seems right now, that's actually very reassuring. Thanks for watching over my wife." They sat as close as possible on a log at the edge of the yard, their arms linked together. "There's so much to say and not nearly enough time," he said to Nicole. "Before you go in, we need to talk about Megan. Have you thought about how you'll feel when you meet her?" Nicole sighed before answering. "I've tried. I can hardly imagine it, though. There are so many conflicting emotions. I have forgiven her and will continue to, but my mind's in constant battle with my heart. They say she's compliant. What does that mean? Is she defiantly compliant or truly willing to be helpful?" "I believe that she wants to help." Jake paused, trying to find the words to say that would explain the changes that had taken place. "This has all happened so fast, and only time will really tell. But once Megan was disconnected from her contacts and the demons were bound, she was open to Jesus. In fact, she chose Jesus and was delivered from the demons. Right now, she just seems vulnerable." "And you think she's serious and not just manipulating you? Do Casey and Liz believe it's for real?" Nicole asked. "I'm pretty sure she's serious. She has a whole different demeanor than she did, and you can ask them what they think. But you are good at discerning spirits, and I think you'll know more when you meet her." "I'm not sure how I can be objective in this case," Nicole said, "but I do choose to continue to forgive her because I will not be taken captive by bitterness. Lord Jesus, help me," Nicole pleaded. Then she said, "We should probably go in. I think I'll feel better once I get the first meeting over with." She started to get up, but Jake held her back. "There is one more thing I need to tell you," he said. "Please listen before you say anything." He looked at her till she nodded her head in agreement. "I did something in obedience to the Holy Spirit, but it affects you as well. He showed me that if we were going to expect Megan to renounce her old life and turn from her family, so to speak, she needed a replacement." Nicole suddenly knew what Jake was going to say. She groaned and her head fell to her knees. "You asked her to be a part of our family, didn't you?" "Think about it, hun. She has your DNA, like a sister, sort of." Nicole groaned again and then lifted her head with a tormented look on her face. "I guess this is where the rubber meets the road. I've chosen the path of forgiveness, and now I have to walk in it." "You choose to walk in it," Jake corrected. Bitterness rose up from deep inside Nicole's heart. "I didn't choose this, you did, and now I'm stuck with this decision." He was quiet and allowed her to think about what she had said, and then he said, "We can go in, and I'll explain to Megan that you aren't ready to make the jump to family yet. I think she'll understand. She was concerned that you might not like it, but I told her that God had probably already been working in your heart. I may have overstepped my bounds. Maybe I didn't really hear God like I thought I had." This time Nicole sighed instead of groaned. "No, I'm pretty sure you heard God right." She took his hands in hers. "I'm sorry I lashed out at you like that. I'm actually very proud of what you did. If it would have been anybody other than Megan, I would be okay with it, but that's my old nature talking, and I refuse to listen to it." Nicole closed her eyes. "Lord Jesus, please change my heart. I choose to put on your love. Help me to be discerning, to know the truth where Megan's concerned, and to love her. Help us to know if this is a trick on her part or if she's genuine. But no matter what, help us to walk in love and know what you want that to look like." Nicole didn't exactly feel peaceful, but she did feel better. They sat a moment longer, knowing it was time to go in, but also relishing their moment together, not wanting it to end. Finally, Jake stood and pulled Nicole up and into his embrace. "Do you forgive me for making such an important decision without you?" "Yes, of course I do. You did right, and I love you." We'll go through this together, my love, he whispered into her ear. He breathed in the scent of her hair as though it was life-giving. Then he wrapped one arm around her and led her into the house. Megan was sitting at the table with a cup of coffee in her hands when they entered the kitchen through the back door. Nicole stopped. Everything stopped in the deafening silence as the two women looked into each other's eyes. Nicole's piercing gaze was met with Megan's unspoken plea for understanding. Without dropping her gaze, Nicole took a step toward her, then another and another, until she was standing at the edge of the table. I hear that we have become sisters, Nicole said as she suddenly smiled and held out her hand to the one who had been her enemy. Megan's gaze never faltered either. She reached out to take Nicole's hand as she pushed her chair back and stood up to meet her. Her what? Was she really being accepted? The two ladies stood eye to eye, hand in hand, for what seemed like forever as they measured each other without a spoken word between them. And then suddenly they were embracing each other and both began to cry and to talk at once. Jake breathed a visible sigh of relief, and Liz came into the room to see what was happening. Her worried expression turned to delight as she watched Nicole and Megan hug each other, then look at each other, then laugh. She went to stand beside Jake and Gus. I'm glad I remember what they were wearing, or else I wouldn't be able to tell them apart, she laughed. Nicole suddenly felt the need to sit down. Megan and Jake joined her. Liz poured them all a cup of coffee, then went back into the other room so that they could talk among themselves. Gus, the ever-watchful bodyguard, stood in the doorway. Megan began. Nicole, she said seriously, I am so sorry for the grief that I've caused you. Please forgive me. Nicole squeezed her hand. Yes, I do forgive you. And please forgive me for hating you. I've confessed this to God and now to you. Megan squeezed back. Of course. Jesus has forgiven me, and I forgive you too. Sam came in, and as he looked back and forth between them, he commented, Well, I'll be. He sat down. Remarkable. Nicole, he said, looking at Megan, and before he could say anything else, both women started laughing. He looked at the other and asked, Nicole? Which had them sent into another fit of laughing because he had to ask. Sam threw up his hands in surrender and looked at Jake, who was just sitting there with a silly grin on his face. Oh, fine, he said. I'll just make some name tags. How do you like them apples? No, I'll have them tattooed on your foreheads instead so you cannot exchange them and torment me like I'm sure you'd like to do. And then he smiled. Nicole raised her hands in front of her eyes like she was holding a camera and made a clicking sound as she took an invisible picture. Megan, remember that smile. It doesn't appear very often. Sam looked at Nicole. Ha! Gotcha! Okay, Nicole's wearing a black t-shirt. He looked at Jake. I'm not so good at remembering details like that. I hear you, Jake responded. Gus moved closer and stood in front of the counter, facing the table with his arms crossed. Sam looked at Gus, and his expression became serious. We don't have much time. I suggest we get down to business. What do you need to know? Megan asked. What do you know of the ultimate plan for the clones? Sam asked. We are not privy to that kind of information. We are designed to fulfill a purpose, and that purpose is all we know. But I have heard things, and will tell you what I think. I should probably explain something to you, though. Megan looked at Sam, and he nodded. Then she continued. While I am a clone, I am an old school model, like prehistoric. No one really pays much attention to me other than Peter. He calls himself my father because he saved me, and then he trained me for this specific job at which I failed terribly. He will be so mad when he finds out the truth. Megan shook her head as if to clear it of that line of thought. What do you mean he saved you? Nicole asked. There were others like me, Megan said, and some that were newer and had better capabilities than us. But they were all terminated when the newest models were created, Megan said without emotion. Why would they terminate them? Sam asked. I look at you and can't comprehend why they didn't find a way to use them, even if they were prehistoric. Megan explained. We were flawed. We tended to think for ourselves. The masters didn't want to waste the time and resources on programming imperfect models when they were continually improving their creation. Most of these older models were kept in cages and treated like animals until they were satisfied that they had designed and created the perfect clone. And then, to my knowledge, they terminated all the others. The newest models are human flesh mixed with DNA of other species, and they're interfaced with unbelievable technology. They also have a spiritual component, what you call demons, layered in. They look human, but with their abilities, they would appear to you as superhuman with supernatural capabilities. None of them have shown resistance of any kind, and I think it's because they're almost more computer than human. Sam whistled. I'm familiar with the transhumanism agenda of creating super soldiers. I just hadn't considered the use of clones. Then he asked, what can you tell us about Peter Chevelle? What role does he play in all this? Megan answered, Peter has more to do with the human slaves and their programming than he does with the clones, although he is a crossover because of his association with Dorothy. And what is Dorothy's role? Sam asked. She's one of the most knowledgeable technicians in the world. She's designed most of the clone technology, which makes her one of their top leaders. She doesn't make the decisions per se. She has a sort of power that causes people to make the decisions she wants them to make. You call it control and manipulation, like a Jezebel spirit. You think I had it bad? That was nothing compared to her. She likes Peter, though, so she lets him tag along. Sam asked, why did Peter save you specifically? You're asking my purpose, Megan said as she sipped her coffee. Peter was given a specific assignment from his predecessor that was to be continued and brought to completion under orders of one of the highest princes. He was to make sure that Nicole carried out her job of destroying all the intercessors, ministers of the gospel, and effective Christians within her sphere of influence, and she was to raise others up to fulfill that purpose as well. Jake said, let me interrupt a minute here. This is something I just can't understand. Why my wife? Why our little town of Samaria when there's a whole world out there? She thought for a moment. Think of the world as a very dark globe, and on that ball of darkness there are spots of shining light scattered around it. Samaria shows up as one of those very bright spots on that globe. The size of the town isn't the issue. It's the brightness that shines from it. The more intercession there is in an area, the brighter it is. Samaria is not the only bright spot, but its light has been spreading and influencing the whole world because of the Christian's love for God and the prayer that rises from it. This was what alerted the Illuminati to Samaria. Nicole's presence there was considered a bonus at first, and they thought that she would take care of their problem for them. She's been set apart and trained for the purpose of stopping intercession because when it is effective, angel armies are dispatched that make war with the princes and their powers. Just before termination, the prince appeared to Peter and told him to save me from destruction and to train me to carry out Nicole's task because she had gone rogue. So he did, and that became my purpose, until now. Who is this prince? Sam asked. Nicole answered, let me guess. Incubus succubus. That's correct, Megan answered. Ah, a spiritual principality, Sam nodded. So you were held captive in a cage until Peter rescued you? No, I'm flawed, remember? I tend to think things through, and I guess even more so than the others did. Early on, I found a way to make myself useful doing jobs nobody wanted. They put me to work delivering food to the clones and cleaning cages. I made sure I appeared dull of mind and was nothing but obedient and compliant. I don't know how to explain it, but I somehow believed that I had to survive by whatever means I could. Over time, I was trusted with other jobs and I learned several skills. I was allowed access to pretty much all the clone center as I required little sleep and liked to stay busy. I was pretty much invisible as they treated me like a machine and I made sure I responded as one. But I watched, listened, and learned as much as I could about everything going on there without anyone suspecting. Sam was listening intently. Then he asked, "When Peter came for you, then what happened?" "He took me to several of the human programming centers for a while. I'm not sure how long. But then we'd go back and forth between the two worlds, partly because I needed my clone technology updated and perfected so that I could fulfill my purpose, and partly because Peter wanted to be with Dorothy, who spends her time at the clone center. I'm not sure why, but he seems to like having me with him. I think he feels like I'm his work of art, and he gets his ego stroked, like he's some kind of god when I'm with him. Dorothy treats me like Peter's pet dog, but I don't mind because she doesn't seem to notice my intellect. Anyhow, Peter also began to take me out into public so that I could learn to interact with people. Sometimes he even takes me with him on his business trips." Nicole smiled. "Ah, yes, the Peter Chevelle line of perfect apparel for the multi-million-dollar industry known as the baby boomers." Megan looked at her with surprise. "You know of this?" "Unfortunately, yes. But we'll compare notes on that later," she replied, and then she asked, "Do you realize that Peter's real name is Damon?" Nicole asked. "Yes, but I always call him Peter so that I don't get confused and call him by the wrong name in public. That would make him angry." "Back to business," Sam directed. "So they programmed you through trauma-based mind control with demons layered in, and you were set up with certain clone technology." "Basically, yes, that is what it was like," Megan said. "There wasn't as much time to program me as most people would undergo, but then they didn't think I had much of a mind to think with and didn't see the need to spend too much time on an imperfect clone." Sam was thoughtful, then asked, "This new model of clones, do you know their purpose?" Megan answered, "I was never given that information. However, I have overheard and seen things. I have heard talk of the day of release, and I think that means the day they release all of the clones into society. I don't know for sure, but I think they're being assigned certain areas, and once they're all in place, the day of purification will begin," Megan explained. "The day of purification?" Sam asked. "You mean as in purifying the world from Christians and those opposed to their cause? It stands to reason that if your job was to get rid of Christians in Samaria, then we can only assume that their jobs are the same, only on a much larger scale and with much more ability to carry out their jobs." "Probably," Megan answered. "Like I said, no one has told me this. I just heard things, and that is my assessment, especially after reading Nicole's Bible every morning. I believe that the goal is not only to kill the Christians in mass destruction, but to rule the whole world through the one you would recognize as the Antichrist." "Do you know when the day of release will be?" Sam asked. "Not specifically," she answered, "but the clones are very close to being ready. They are in training and conditioning about 20 hours out of every day. They don't require much food or sleep." "What would happen if the computer system shut down?" Sam wondered out loud. "Would it just disable the clones, or would it be dangerous for them?" "I'm not sure about the dangerous part. I do know that they rely completely on orders, so disconnecting them would definitely have an effect on them," Megan answered. Sam said, "We need to do what we can to stop this murderous rampage, but we don't want to harm them if we don't have to. I'd like to save as many as we can." Megan sighed. "Until today, I didn't think I was a person. I knew I had human genes, but I didn't think that made me human. I know they believe they are even less human than I felt, and I do have compassion for them. I would like to think that these clones could be saved. I think the word you use is redeemed. But I truly don't know if that's possible. They are slaves at a much deeper level than I was." "You've done a good job, Megan," Sam said. "God uses everything that Satan meant for destruction, and he can turn it into something useful and beautiful when we surrender to him. I'm very sorry that you've had to experience this difficult life, but God is using the things you've learned to help us now be able to stop Satan's destruction." "Well," Megan said, "I don't know if you'll be able to stop Satan's destruction. The clones are only one part of the plan." All eyes went to her. "What do you mean?" Sam asked. "Well, there are the humans that have been programmed, like Nicole was. There are thousands of them that have been programmed specifically for the same purpose as the clones, all ignorantly waiting for the trigger that will awaken the sleeping program within them on the day of purification. The clones are to join the humans in unity of purpose. Nicole suddenly remembered a dream she had had many months back. In the dream, jihad had been proclaimed in the middle of a church worship service where the congregation was mainly white Anglos, not Muslim as she would have expected. She thought that it had been a representation of the holy war between Christians as theology had become destructive and divisive amongst themselves. Now she saw the dual meaning. God had also been warning her of this day when Satan would launch jihad, his holy war on God's people. Sam ran his hand over his head like he always did when he was deep in thought. This is bringing together a lot of loose ends. We know that the Illuminati have been working on bringing in the New World Order. He almost jumped right out of his chair as he exclaimed, I think I get it. The clones aren't replacing the people. People are sleepers who have been programmed with the day of purification assignments are already settled in mainstream society, probably strategically placed where they will carry out their orders quite effectively. The clones will be released, aiding the humans in destruction, and then they'll take over society and become the police for the New World Order.